Hi there, I'm Jonathan Fields, and my guest today is Chris Guillebeau. Chris is entering the tail year of a 5-year journey to visit every country in the world. He's a best-selling author, an entrepreneur, somebody who, about 10, 12 years ago, for a number of years, actually was in Africa, sort of exploring the world of service and figuring out what he wanted to do from there. So we're going to track that journey a little bit. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me, man.
Awesome, anytime. So right now, we're hanging out, and you're in the process. You're getting ready to launch another big book, but I want to kind of zoom the lens out a little bit and talk a little bit more about your bigger story. So
sure.
Let's kind of jump back for a moment to about 10 years.
Okay.
So right now, you live in Portland. You're an online entrepreneur. You're a writer. You do all these really cool things. We'll get to that. But 10 years ago, where were you?
10 years ago, I was about 22, 23 years old, and I was living in Alabama, of all places. And I'd found a way to establish my own way of life. I was self-employed. I was selling things on eBay,
Right.
playing jazz music at night, and all those things were fine. I was like, this is great. I found my own, freedom. Essentially, I can work half time and do my own thing. But I also felt like something was kind of lacking, and so that kind of inspired the move to Africa.
So tell me how you actually made the jump from doing that to ending up in Africa one day.
Yeah, so it was after 9/11. I was depressed like you were and like lots of other people were, and just what's my place in the world, and is there something I can do to help and volunteer? And I felt like I was doing some small things, like I could give some money to charity or something, but I was I want to make a more substantial commitment. And so I just went online one night, and I read this story of a surgeon from California who had gone overseas to West Africa to kind of serve in the poorest region of the world. And he went there for a little while, but ended up staying for 18 years, met his wife, another volunteer, and they raised a family there. And so I just found myself kind of challenged by that story, and I thought okay, wow, if this guy can essentially give up a very lucrative career in California and do it, maybe there's something I can do too, And so I saw that they had opportunities for volunteers of all kinds and people just to run logistics or whatever, and so
Right.
signed up and went, and it was great.
So you make it sound like, well, I just signed up and went.
Well, sure, there was some process to it.
Right, and when people think about that also, I mean, had you been traveling much before that? Were you somebody who knew the world and was interested in it, or is this something?
A little bit. I had traveled some. When I was a kid, I lived in the Philippines for a couple of years. My mom married this guy who was in the Air Force, and we were stationed over there for a while. So I had traveled a little, but not extensively. So it really was like a whole new world. But it sounded exciting to me. It sounded like it was a challenge. It was like, why not go to the poorest country in the world? If you're going to do something, why not do it, all the way? So it wasn't scary so much as it was, thrilling and fulfilling.
So in your mind, what were you going to do there? What was this about for you? I mean, what was the purpose?
Well, in my mind, I just wanted to be of service of some kind, and I didn't really care, about the details. I was married, still am, to Jolie, and Jolie was a teacher, so she actually had some qualifications. I had no real qualifications, playing jazz music and selling things on eBay. I had a degree in sociology, but nobody cares about that. So, when we applied, she was kind of like our ticket in, basically oh, qualified teacher, that's great, and we're not sure what to do with this guy. So I initially went to kind of manage a warehouse and carry boxes around, and that was fine. It was great. I mean, it was actually very fulfilling to go to Sierra Leone and bring medical supplies to a clinic, in the interior that didn't have any.
So you started out in Sierra Leone. Is that where you were how long were you there for?
Well, we were living on a hospital ship, and it was deployed in each country for 6 to 9 months.
Okay.
And so Sierra Leone was our first stop, but we spent time in probably 8 or 9 countries in West Africa, mostly in Sierra Leone and in Liberia as well. So we were in Liberia also for a year.
Right. So from the time you got there to the time you actually were sort of done with the service, how long? What was the window there?
4 years.
Right.
2002 to 2006. We made a 2-year commitment, and then we extended for 2 years.
So talk to me a little bit about shifts that happened in you during that window in time.
Yeah, shifts that happened to me. Good question. I guess probably first thing is just expanded worldview. I didn't know a whole lot about the world, even though I traveled a little bit. I'd never been to Africa. I'd been to some poor countries, but never to a country that just came out of a war. And so, there's a lot of just personal change that goes, in seeing things like that. And it wasn't all bad. It was often good because I could see like there's signs of joy and hope and rebuilding, and so just kind of considering more like, what is my response to this? I've been very fortunate and privileged, so what can I do to be a part of it? And then I guess I also just grew a lot more confident in myself and like my ability to travel, or my ability to like, kind of get out of difficult situations or something. And because I was traveling in that region, it's very difficult, and often like to get from one country to another, you have to take like multiple flights and 17-hour layovers and all this kind of stuff. And when I started doing that, I thought it was normal. I was like, this is how everybody travels, And then like later I would travel to Eastern Europe or Central Asia or other parts of the world, and I was like, this is very easy, compared to what I'd done before.
So from there, I mean, and also you were in Sierra Leone at a time where this was not exactly like a chill, stable country.
No, it wasn't. It really wasn't stable. In Liberia as well. But we also, I don't want to exaggerate it, because we also weren't there during the war. We were there right after the war.
Right.
So there was a certain amount of stability, in that there wasn't active fighting. Like the UN had come in and is kind of running the country as like a UN state.
Right.
So we weren't in a lot of physical danger. It was more a question of adapting to circumstances where nothing is available.
Yeah. So, and I'm curious too, because Jolie went with you. And was she actively teaching before this?
Was she teaching?
Yeah.
Yeah. She had been a high school teacher, and she was just as excited as I was.
Right.
She was like, let's do it. Let's make a change. We had talked about doing it. We've been together since high school, and we had talked about going overseas and doing something, for years, but never did anything about it, like most people. And when we had a real opportunity, she was like, let's embrace it.
Yeah. So in your mind, did you have any sense for how long that you guys would be a part of this, or you just kind of went and said, let's just see what happens?
It was open-ended. We made a 2-year initial commitment,
Right.
Sight unseen. But again, I kind of liked that. I was attracted to the element of like edge and commitment. Like 2 years, just do it. If there was an option to do 1 year, I probably would have chosen 2. Just because it's like I want to really do something significant. I knew I really wouldn't be of much service if I just went and was kind of like, I'll stay until I get tired of it.
Right. Yeah, and it sounds like it was really impactful in a lot of different ways. I remember you telling me at one point that, and the way you just described, like you were there basically helping move boxes around and logistics and stuff like that. But it sounded like also as you were sort of there longer, your responsibility and what you're doing evolved too.
Yeah, it did. I guess at some point someone saw some potential in me and decided I should do more than just carry boxes around, although I was happy to do that. And then, during the final 2 years I was there, I represented the organization to the host governments we were partnering with, and that's how I ended up traveling a lot independently throughout the region, getting comfortable with that. I was 25, 26 years old, and meeting the president of Liberia or the minister of health, from such and such country, and again, it's kind of weird now looking back, because at the time it just seemed normal. It was like, oh, we're going to send Chris to Benin, and he's going to go talk to the cabinet or whatever. And I was like, okay, great,
Right.
So now it's like I can see that was a really transformative time. But, when it was happening, it was just like, this is what I do,
Right. Which is incredible, because like you said, you're in your mid-20s and you're meeting with presidents of nations, and I have to imagine that, going from living in the United States to that, and then being entrusted with higher and higher levels of responsibility until you're eventually doing what you're doing in a fairly short period of time. Were you confident? Did it, or were you just like, did you ever wake up and just say, is this for real? Or were you just kind of like going about your business, like, this is what we do, we're on the ground, this is our job, this is what we do?
The whole experience in many ways was surreal. Like to go and live on this hospital ship, and that sails into countries right after a civil war, and there's, refugees and internally displaced people, everywhere. And then we would go and do medical screenings at stadiums, and I would be in charge of like the security or crowd control, and thousands of people would come, and we'd have to like figure out, how people are going to queue and how they're going to get through the process in an orderly fashion. And so it's surreal, right? But when you're doing it, it's just like, that's your job, that's what you do, and other people are doing it too. So It was always very intense, but it was always very good and rewarding.
So when you guys finally finished up do you call it a tour? What is it? What's your commitment?
It's 4 years
Right.
overseas. I don't
When you
know.
finish up your 4-year commitment over there, you decided to come back. And where did you guys came back? Well, did you come back straight to Portland or somewhere else?
We moved to Seattle, and
Right.
we actually didn't have any connection to the Northwest, but we knew a lot of people who had been there, and we were kind of attracted to the region, and so we just moved to Seattle.
Right. So, and what's in your mind? What are you going to do now?
Well, I went to grad school. I applied for a master's program in international studies at the University of Washington, and so I got into that. And so my mind is, let's go back and do that. I also want to keep traveling. I started traveling more and more on my own. I wanted to do that a little bit, and I had in my mind at some point to start a writing project. But at that point, it was very vague and undefined what it would be.
Right. So from there, you're in grad school. This is around 2006.
Yeah, 2006, 2008.
Right. And right around then, also, you decide to mount a quest.
Right. Yes.
Talk to me about this.
Sure. So the quest is to visit every country in the world.
Right.
But it didn't begin with that. It actually began with a quest to visit 100 countries.
Okay.
Right. And that came about on one of these little trips that I did on my own. I was in Eastern Europe. I was riding this train. And this is like before Wi-Fi is everywhere, no iPads, you know. So I just have a paper notebook.
It was a world before Wi-Fi and
I know,
iPads.
it was awful. Yeah.
God.
It was terrible. We had to like make things up by hand. But I'm just kind of journaling, and I was like, where all have I been? And listing all these places. And I'm like, oh, I've been to like 50 countries so far. All right, you know. And then I've always kind of been attracted to goal setting and like, just ordering my life that way. And so I thought I'd like to visit 100 countries, sometime in my life. Let's set that as a goal. And so I kept getting closer to the 100 countries sooner than I expected. And I realized it was kind of an easy goal because you could pick and choose, which countries to go to.
Right.
And so as I got closer, 70, 80, I started thinking like, what would be a real goal, like a real challenge, and that's when I thought like, why not every country?
Right. So again, there's this like common theme that like we used to, where you're like, okay, let's like push, what's the edge? What's the outer edge of this quest that I can achieve?
Sure. Well, without the edge, it's boring.
No, I happen to agree.
You know what I mean? Like, if you're just doing something that's definitely achievable,
Right.
you're like 100% odds of success. Okay, where's the draw to that?
I totally agree. I mean, which is interesting though, because that most people do exactly that. They go instead of going, they're like, what can I absolutely attain?
Right.
Because I want to feel good. Like, I don't want to do this unless I know
Right.
that I'm going to be able to feel good.
Right.
Whereas, the truth is that takes so much of the joy out of the process. It adds a whole bunch of certainty.
Right.
But that's not what we really, that's what makes it, not what makes us come alive.
Oh, exactly. I mean, if success is guaranteed, is it really success?
Right.
When you achieve that, you're like, great, I did what I said I was going to do. My goal is to go to bed tonight and wake up in the morning. All right.
Sweet.
All
All right, so you get to a point where you're like, okay, 100 is not enough.
Yeah.
Then what?
All right, so then it's like, okay, every country in the world. Then I actually had to think a little bit more about the process for it because,
Right.
again, like doing the 100 was kind of like, oh, just do this, and it will all come together. Every country in the world definitely required, a little bit more commitment and, significant planning. So I think I officially set that goal in 2008. And that's also when I started blogging about it. I started this blog, The Art of Nonconformity, and I said, hey, I'm going to visit every country in the world, and I'm going to use the UN definition of countries, so 193 countries. Here's where I've been so far, and I hope to achieve this goal, because every goal has a deadline, otherwise it's not really a goal. So I hope to achieve this goal by 2013, my 35th birthday. And just started kind of backing it up from there. Okay, what's that look like? And that requires me to go to 20 to 25 countries every year. How do I do that? What strategies do I use? How do I pay for it? What's the sacrifice going to be? Like all this kind of thing.
So in your mind also, I mean, you start a blog at the same time you commit to this. So you're not just saying committing internally, you're saying I'm going public to the world
Right.
with this. Why?
Maybe forced accountability.
Yeah.
Maybe like, what the hell? Let's just go for it and put it out there. It wasn't so much like, hey, look at me. Here's what I'm doing. Especially in the beginning, it was very introverted kind of thing. It was very like, I'm just on this personal quest and I'll do this even if no one else cares about it. And I think for a quest like that, you have to have that motivation because there's going to be lots of disappointments and setbacks along the way. So you better have like your own motivation. I just, I wanted to share, what I learned along the way.
Right. So now at this point, you're about 4 years into the quest, and you're about 4 years into the blog at this point.
Yep, exactly.
Also, because they kind of
Right.
had a similar birthday. And on the quest, you're at how many countries now?
185 so far,
185
out of 193, so I got 8 more to go.
Right, so you got 8 in a year, but we also know you have a whole lot of other stuff going
Right,
on in
book
that
tour
final
and
year.
things, yeah.
And let's explore a little bit about what's happened with what started out as a blog, which is sort of just like sharing this quest and some external accountability. Talk to me about what that's grown into.
Yeah, it's grown quite a bit. So I wrote, in the beginning, I'm just like sharing my own thoughts about the world, and I'm traveling to all these countries. Here's what I do. Here's a little bit about self-employment, because I'd always worked for myself, but it was a little bit random in the beginning, and just kind of throwing stuff out there. And so I started getting some feedback, and a lot of people said, "Oh, this is great, Chris, but how does this help me?" That's probably that was a very significant turning point when I realized, actually in the beginning, this is fairly self-centered, and there's nothing wrong with doing your own project. I believe in that, but I wanted it to be more than that, and so just started shifting the focus in what it's all about to not so much about my quest, but other people that are doing their own quests or their own projects, or how they can change the world, or how they can pursue their own independent thing. So that shift was really important, and as I made that shift, I think all the other growth came. So the blog became a business. The blog became my first book. Then I went on tour to every state and province in Canada for the first book. That was really good because at each point along the way, I'd meet people and hear fun stories.
Right.
That kind of led to the second book. And
so let me unpack that a little bit. So basically, the blog starts out as something which is external accountability to you, and largely just self-serving, like it's just saying what's on your mind.
Sure.
And then at some point, you make the shift and say, this needs to be of service in some way. This, that actually, and did that decision, clearly it affected the blog. It affected your ability to build a substantial online business and multiple streams of revenue now. Did that affect the way that you pursued your quest from that moment forward, or?
I think I'm not sure it affected the travel aspect of things so much, because I continued to kind of be like my own traveler, and I often want to be by myself, but I think it affected everything else. And it certainly affected everything about how I thought about the project, how I thought about my work in general, about what I'm trying to contribute to the world. It definitely made a big shift. So I think maybe in the beginning the travel was like 70-80% of everything, and now I think the travel part is like 20% of everything.
So let's talk a little bit more about what that everything is now, because you've built something really substantial that's incredible. It starts out as a blog, and then you said you start to build a business around it. So, and which again was, just adding, how can I add more value? How can I add more value? So how does this start to emerge into something much more significant from a business standpoint?
Yeah, sure. From the business standpoint, it was mostly in response to perceived needs. Like I kept hearing from people the same questions over and over. I started by writing about my trips, so people have quite like, how do you do this? How do you buy the tickets? And I would share like some general tips about how I was able to like get this round the world ticket for very low cost, or how I use my miles to go to Bangladesh or whatever, and people would want more information about it, right? And so just started providing specific resources kind of in response to those questions. So it is about adding value, but it's also about meeting a need. And I didn't even realize that was a need in the beginning until I started hearing that from people.
So from there, that turns into you launch a business. Well, I guess so you now have a company or a business called Unconventional Guides, and some other stuff too. Did Unconventional Guides start, was the concept, I'm going to start Unconventional Guides, grow a whole library of things that help you?
No,
or was
not
it
at
like,
all.
here's one thing I'm going to
Here's one thing. It was definitely like that. And
Right.
with the Art of Nonconformity, I didn't start with a business model in mind at all.
Right.
I did want to write a book, so I knew at some point I wanted to do that. But I really had no monetization strategy for it. In some ways, I thought of it as kind of like, higher level than that. I'm like, I don't want to make money off this. And then after a while, I realized it's not bad at all to like have an entrepreneurial branch, of something, and then have a nonprofit writing branch of something, and you can do all kind. You don't have to make things so clearly defined. But it definitely happened along the way.
Right. So what's the first thing that you actually create beyond the blog that becomes a revenue generating?
Oh, first thing I made was this very brief ebook called the Discount Airfare Guide, which as a marketer is a terrible title. And it's just descriptive, no benefit, no sexiness, no anything, just like here's a discount airfare guide, and I did that project very simply, and it was essentially a test. It was essentially like, are people interested in actually paying for these kind of resources?
Right. That was just an ebook.
Just an ebook,
Right.
very short, like 24 pages.
Right.
You know?
And you just shared it with the blog?
Yeah, I shared it with the blog, and I kind of prepared people a little bit because, I felt like this project in general was kind of close to my heart.
Mm-hmm.
Like I felt like it was I write a lot about legacy, and I'm like, this project is like part of what I hope to achieve as a legacy. So I kind of prepared people and said like, hey, the blog and everything I do, it's free, and it will always be free, and I do so much for free, but I'm also making this, and if you're interested, you can check it out. Otherwise, please, just stay on my email list, and you're not going to get pitched all the time.
Right.
So yeah, mostly just to the blog, and then we sold like $1,000 worth of copies, and I was thrilled. I was like, wow, like $1,000, like this is amazing,
So from there, did the light go on at that moment, or did it kind of, what happened? Because you grew it into something much more substantial.
Eventually, yeah, but it was another 2 years, I think. It was
Okay.
a long process. So I think the light of possibility went on.
Right.
Then. The light of like, okay, I could do something with this.
Okay.
But I'm still feeling like a little, not apprehensive, I just want to be very careful. I feel like people have actually given me their trust. And, in some ways, like, in some ways I think it's a big commitment to give someone like your email address and like sign up to receive these mailings, and like I'm going to look forward to them coming, and I don't want to abuse that trust in any way. So I guess yes, I saw the light bulb of possibility, but I also thought let's be careful about how we do this. Let's do this like somewhat in an organized fashion.
Right, so it wasn't like the marketer's head goes like, okay, let's get as much money as possible now that we see this is doable. It's kind of like, how do we do this in a way that's as respectful as possible?
Right.
So it took another 2 years to build this, essentially a library of different products and services that range now from, what are some of the other unconventional guides that are now part
Well,
of
the
this?
next one was the Unconventional Guide to Working for Yourself,
Okay.
and that was kind of same thing as the Airfare guide, is like in response to questions about self-employment. And, and then from there, started getting a little bit higher level. I made something called the Empire Building Kit, which was like, okay, a whole bunch of collection of resources and case studies and interviews, and let's actually break down the whole process of building a business over time. So that was a more substantial product.
So then over this 2 year window, this grows from $1,000 ebook into something which is as substantial.
It's substantial. I mean, it's multiple six figures.
Right.
I don't necessarily have any plan or desire to scale it much beyond that. We'll see what happens, but it is just me. Like I don't have employees or contractors or assistants, and that's not really what I want. That's not the growth that I really want to see. So, but I'm very happy with how it is now.
Which is a really powerful thing, because a lot of people would look at you and they'll say, okay, he's got a giant audience who loves him. He gives all the time to them, and he's built this mid six figure business with these guides. So clearly, if you can build it to mid six figure, you can build it to mid seven and maybe mid eight by expanding it. But that's not what drives you, apparently.
Yeah, well, what do you do with mid seven figures that you can't do with mid six figures is one thing, I think. And also, I'm not trying to build a company. I feel like...
I think that's the big thing.
Yeah, if I wanted to build a company, maybe that would work, maybe not. I mean, but I think, I'm not sure I'd be able to do the other things that I'm doing. I'm not sure, at least my focus would be where I want it to be.
And I think that's where a lot of people really trip themselves up, is that they see, okay, I can see a path to scale this into something really substantial, without sort of zooming the lens out and saying, what will that do to my ability to do all the things that I like to do in the world? How will that add complexity? How will that add challenge? How will it affect my relationships beyond that?
Exactly.
And it seems like that, like ever since I've known you, you've been like very laser focused, always on that question with everything that you do from a business standpoint. It's like, okay, how's this going to affect the bigger mix?
Yeah, well, hopefully so. I mean, I think I've got it wrong a number of points along the way. You always like try and make mistakes, and you regroup and stuff. So it's not always like laser focus, everything is perfect, but I would say that is the driving force, sure.
Yeah, and so from there we also, then you do another deep dive and you launch another business called, which is around traveling and gaining air miles.
Right. And that was the travel hacking cartel.
Right.
And that's also kind of under the Unconventional Guides umbrella. But there I wanted a monthly membership service. And it's also kind of in response to a lot of feedback I got about the earlier travel products. The feedback was like, this is great, I want more updates. Like I want, like things are changing all the time, I want like weekly updates, I want to know when there's like a big deal going on. And I did send people that information from time to time, but I wasn't very strategic about it until we created the travel hacking cartel.
Right. And then from there, you finally circle back to that earlier goal, which is you want to write a book.
Exactly. Right.
So the Art of Nonconformity becomes, the Art of Nonconformity, the website and the blog becomes the Art of Nonconformity, the book, which came out, was 2 years ago now?
Yeah, something like that. Who knows?
Like that, right? Explodes all over the place.
Well, it exploded a little bit. I don't know if
And
it
then,
exploded too much. It was
and
no
then-
uncertainty book.
Right,
but-
true to your form, true to pushing the edge, when like the whole publishing world is saying like, don't go on tour, they're worthless, nobody's going to show up unless you're a celebrity, you decide to do what?
I put together my own tour. I put together what I called an unconventional book tour, and I decided like if the publisher doesn't want to send me around, I'll send myself around. And again, you want to push the edge. So what's exciting? If I tell people I'm going to 10 cities, they're like, "Wow, okay, great, whatever." And so I said, "We'll go to all 50 states. Like, let's do that." And then I was like, I got a lot of readers in Canada as well. Let's not leave them out. So we'll add every province there. So we end up with 63 cities in total, and
Over how long?
how long was it? Maybe about 3 months or so. 3 months. It was pretty like continuous cycle for a while. I would do like
trains, planes, and automobiles nonstop.
yeah, trains exactly. I did like 10 cities at a time, back to back, like no breaks, and then I would go home for a few days. And I would fly back out to the next one and do it. It was great. It was the best, probably the best career choice I made. And
So it's so funny you say that though,
Yeah.
because people would look at you and they'd be like, "There's no conceivable way he's going to make his money back by doing this." That's the first thing that pops into everybody's head. And you're like, "This was the best career
it
choice."
totally was the best choice in many ways.
Right. So how?
Well, first of all, I did make the money back.
Right.
First of all, it helped me attract a lot of interest from other publishers, for my next book. And it was a big selling point. And for my first book, it was kind of hard when my literary agent is making phone calls. And he's like, "Here's this guy." And they're like, whatever, we got turned down by a lot of places. Second time, it was like, "Here's this guy. He's got this first book out that's doing pretty well." And he put together his own tour to meet his readers in all 50 states. And nobody else was doing that. So it made it much easier for him. So, the money stuff sorted itself out. But more importantly, I met readers at every stop along the way, and that's what sustains your career. And I would go to small towns, and there would be 15 people there, and I was like, "I'm glad to be here. It's great." You never know what's going to happen. You can meet one person somewhere, and that person can be a huge supporter of you for the next decade or more.
And what I think is getting so lost also, I mean, you and I operate largely in the digital world these days, and the relationship, it's a great way to just spark a relationship, but I think a lot of people are missing the fact that it's still, there's no substitute for just being in a room with somebody. There are chemistry, there are connections, there are conversations that happen that would just never happen when you're bantering online.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And I met a lot of people who don't read blogs at all. I met a lot of people who don't use Twitter.
Wait a minute, there are people who don't read
Apparently
books.
there are. Apparently not everyone is on Twitter. I know you're just back from speaking at Twitter. That's probably shocking to them, but it's true. And so you meet different people, and connections from online can then be transferred offline and vice versa.
Right.
And it does create a more deeper impact. And also just going to all the different cities, not just the major markets, was really good.
Right. So let's come full circle. Now we're talking at a time where you're launching a new book called The $100 Startup. Where does this come out of?
This came out of a lot of stories I heard from that book tour, from online readers, from the Empire Building Kit. I kept hearing fun stories of people that I called unconventional entrepreneurs or unexpected entrepreneurs. In some ways, you're one of those people. People who never really had a lot of business background, or they didn't have an MBA, they didn't necessarily plan on starting a business, but something happened to them. There was a transition point. In some cases, they were laid off or fired. In other cases, they just wanted to make a change, and they ended up starting a business without special skills and without going into debt. So without borrowing money, without begging friends or family,
Right.
starting a successful business.
So, and what's your hope for this book? What do you want it to do in the world?
I hope it does two things. One, I wanted to share the stories, of these people. We recruited 1,500 different case studies and kind of narrowed it down to 70 stories that are in the book. They're very specific, data-driven stories. Lots of financial information is in there. It talks about how much money people make and how they did it. So I wanted to share those stories. And then secondly, wanted to provide a blueprint for readers to do the same thing. So it's mostly about helping readers create their own freedom.
Right. So, I mean, when you look at what you've done over this period of years, there are these common threads, and it seems like you've just figured out different outlets, different uses of media, different ways to serve and solve on behalf of people who are in some way trying to tap into something in themselves that allows them to be here, doing what they feel they're here to do, and earn enough to live okay in the world. So, finish the loop here. The book comes out. Your last tour was 50 states and 13 provinces.
Yeah.
You're going to always push the edge.
Yes.
So what are we doing this time?
Yeah, the first time that question came up was on the call with one of the publishers who was bidding for the book, and they said the same. They're like, "What are you going to do now? Like, how are you going to top what you're, And so just kind of off the cuff, I said, well, next time we're going to go to every continent. So we're going to go to the world's first 7-continent book tour. And they said, even Antarctica? And I said, of course, Antarctica. So now we're beginning the 7-continent book tour.
7 continents. Well, I look forward to following that adventure. It's going to be really awesome. I want to thank you so much. It's always a great conversation.
Oh, of course.
I wish you continued success with everything that you do. I love how it's all based in a place of service. And a lot of people wonder, what's the secret sauce to growing substantial businesses and doing this and that. And I think when it comes from that place, from heart, from service, that's the core of everything. So again, thank you so much.
Oh,
Good
thank
luck
you.
with everything.
Appreciate it. I'll see you in Antarctica.
Sounds good.